Okay, let's see if I can get part two of the lab correct this time. I didn't do it incorrectly. I just needed to move some things around. I couldn't really see the powders that well, so I messed around with the camera and it's focused enough so you should be able to see this. Just real quick, keep in mind, in the first column we have cornstarch, in the second column baking soda, in the third column cornstarch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of water into the wells of the first row, A1, A2, and A3. And we're going to know our observations, and we're going to write them down in our data table. Just a little bit of water. I'll give that a second. Looks like the cornstarch is dissolving a little bit in the water. Baking soda and water this time. Looks like it's just dissolving. I don't really see any color changes. I don't see any bubbling, anything like that. Let's go to the baking powder. When I add water, you can notice a reaction happening, folks. This is a chemical change. We see lots of bubbles being evolved here. We don't have to know what they are, but notice the reaction of water and baking powder definitely was more vigorous than the other two. The next reaction I'm going to do is vinegar. I have vinegar right beside me here. I'm going to add vinegar to B1, B2, and B3. I have the dropper in my hand. And here we go. Here is vinegar and cornstarch in B1. Not a whole heck of a lot going on. Vinegar and baking soda in B2. Notice vigorous bubbles. No color changes yet, folks, but there is a chemical change, a chemical reaction occurring in B2 with the vinegar and baking soda. Here we go with vinegar and baking powder in B3. Also vigorous bubbling. And you can refer back to this video, but again, that is baking powder and vinegar. Lastly, we have our three knowns. I'm going to use iodine, the iodine test. Let's see what happens. The first is iodine, and note the color of iodine if you can see it. It's this dark orange brown sort of color. You're going to need to note that because if it does change color, that's indicative of another chemical change. Let's see what happens when we add iodine to our starch. If you can see that, it turns black. It's no longer this dark orangey color. Anytime starch and iodine come into contact, it turns black. So note that in your data table. That's cornstarch and vinegar, cornstarch and iodine, black. Here is baking soda and iodine. It did not change to that dark black color like it did with cornstarch. Iodine and baking soda, that's considered a negative test. No real change there. No bubbling, no color change. Lastly, let's do iodine and baking powder. That's definitely a dark color too, ladies and gentlemen. Much, much different. And it looks like we have some bubbling. So baking powder is really we're getting a lot of chemical reactions with that. I'm going to pause the video and load up the last two columns with our suspect's shoes, the powder found on the suspect's shoe, and the crime scene. So we have suspect's shoe in all three of those, in that entire column, and crime scene. First thing we're going to do is add water to the shoe and the crime scene. Get stuff everywhere. Nothing happening with the shoe, lots of bubbling happening with the crime scene. Let's now go to vinegar, as I'm running low on time here with this video. Vinegar. Nothing happening with the shoe, lots happening with the crime scene. And lastly, our iodine test. Here's the shoe. Black. Here is the crime scene. Also that dark black color. What we find, based on the other chemical properties and chemical changes that we've seen, is that the powder from the shoe is not the same powder that was found at the crime scene. So the suspect is clear of the crime. The shoe was cornstarch, and the crime scene was baking powder.